You've got just 5 weeks left to go in your AFL Fantasy SuperCoach Dream Team and Keeper season left to go. Can the year get in the bin? Or are there some good things left to redeem in 2025? Look, regardless on this strategy session, we're going to help you find the right stocks on and stocks out options. We're going to help you nail those right unique picks, help you to know when to separate and when to just get in line, and some unique conversations we've got lined up for you in this week's strategy session. It's MJ from the Coaches Panel. I do hope you're well, and I hope you've enjoyed your fantasy footy season with us so far. Joining me on this week's pod, as he does through every strategy session this year, regular part of the Coaches Panel, it's MiniMonk. Mate, up and about as a Fremantle docker. I got to see you boys play live and in person. Upset of the year. It was incredible. I took an American to the game who's now bringing the sport back to the States. Up and about, mate. Get around him.
I'm not sure you can say it was upset of the year, given the odds were still relatively tight, but I can probably say best game of the year. I think that was a fantastic game, and I probably would have had a heart attack if I was there with you at the ground. So I'm glad to get that win, but we're here to chat fantasy, not to chat actual footy. And as good as that game was, there was obviously a couple of really big standout scorers in AFL fantasy. Caleb Sarong and Nick Dacos, obviously the big two who had huge games, and anyone in draft who had Pat Voss would have been having an absolute laugh.
Oh my gosh. Let's not talk about Essendon in relation to that. Let's move very much forward for the sake of pain points. Like, I do want to hit the matchup soon. I do want to talk about captaincy, and I do want to talk about some unique ideologies that we could take to really create the right level of separation in our ranks and in our leagues. But we are well and truly at the time of the year where, depending on you're going league or rank focus, we now have real freedom to throw away positions. We should have playing bench cover in every line. And then if you've done your bench hygiene well, and sometimes there are variances that stop us from doing that, I understand. But if you've got a healthy level of bench, you might be able to scrape 100,000 or 2 to 250, 300,000 off certain players, and then be able to utilize your secondary trade to get the upgrade you want. Get your McKercher up, get your Chera up, get your underperforming flex, whatever it is to be able to do that. So my question is, how do we determine the right player or players that we should be looking at as our throwaway option that can either be utilized for loopholes and or for VCC scores? Who and how do we get to this place to know when and who to throw our last spot on?
So there's 3 things you typically want to look for. You want to look for basement price, you want to look for DPP, and you want to look for fixture. So basement price is different across the formats, but in SuperCoach and DT, there's another tier lower than what you would consider your typical rookies. You get some players that come in at 99K in SuperCoach and in around the 175K in DT. In AFL Fantasy, there's a lot more players that are at that 230K bracket, so there's a few more to pick from. So I think that's where we'll kind of go from there, and we'll see if there's any that kind of come across into the other 2 formats as well. DPP, typically you're not looking for someone with the ruck DPP, especially in SuperCoach and DT where you only have the 3 ruck spots. In AFL Fantasy, you do have the utility, which does help a little bit more, but it tends to be a bit more useful to loop across your forward lines, your midfields, and your defenders. So that kind of narrows the pool down a bit more. And then you want to play fixtures. And while we don't have a fixture app around 24 as of yet, we know the teams that are probably going to be playing a bit earlier on in that round. And that's going to be the game between, I think it's Essendon and Carlton, and round 24 is going to be earlier on because Essendon have to then play again later on the next week, later on in that round. And we also know that Port Adelaide and Gold Coast will have to be played earlier on as well because Gold Coast have to play again later on in round 24. And they also do like to back end that fixture with, well, that round with fixtures that are really going to define positions in the A. So you can expect games like Brisbane and Hawthorn, Fremantle and the Western Bulldogs, and to a lesser extent, some of the fixtures like Melbourne versus Collingwood and GWS playing as well to be towards the back end of that fixture. And so when you start to narrow that down, it really comes down to almost a list of 4 players to my mind in AFL Fantasy. And and it's always going to depend on what that DPP is that you want. So if we look across the lines, there's Sed from St Kilda. I think it's Sed or Said or however you pronounce his surname.
Sure. Yep.
Haven't seen him enough to know how to pronounce it, but he's a mid forward who plays for St Kilda. They've got a relatively back-ended fixture as well. You've got a couple of mid forwards at North Melbourne in Payne and Stevens, who are both also basemen as well. And the one that tends to come to mind for a lot of players, and it is also the almost go-to option in DT and SC as well, because he is that 99K in SuperCoach and 175K in AFL Fantasy, which compared to the others are not, is Mentha, who is a defender forward. Now, Melbourne have a pretty reasonable fixture to be able to loop with. They play the last game of this round. They do play a little bit earlier on in round 21 against the Eagles on that Saturday first fixture. But then in round 22, they're back on the Sunday again. In round 23, they're on the Saturday mid-afternoon after 4 other fixtures have happened. And I think on the round 24, they'll probably plunk that Collingwood versus Melbourne game on the Saturday night, I would say, at the MCG. That would be my expectation.
So there's some names, but it does feel, based on, without putting words in your mouth, Mentha's probably the one across the formats when you put basement price, DPP, and what's probably available to the lines you want to loop and the positions that sit there, and then the fixture. Mentha's probably sounds like your A1 choice. Again, not everyone's there in Dream Team and SuperCoach, but certainly in AFL Fantasy, it's much more potentially available to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And in Dream Team and SuperCoach, it's, you can scrape that extra 20K off, and that might be the difference between getting the last upgrade that you want and the last upgrade that you don't, or having the ability to have a bit more flexibility. Like if you do have an injury to one of your players, you're not stuck going to someone that's exactly the same price. You might have that 30 or 40K to go up again. But yeah, I think that that's the way that I would be leaning to at this stage, with knowing what we do know.
Yeah. Can I ask you about a league focus, Coach? Some leagues are really different. Some's are focused around a more traditional final 4 weeks of the year, so they're still 1 week away from finals. Others try to backlog and get away from round 24, because historically we've seen some teams giving players a little bit of an extra break and rest, either to avoid a concussion, to keep them stopping from being sore, whatever the club basis is. And it's more teams that are obviously finals bound than anything else. So sometimes they move it forward a week just to protect that. Totally fine if that's how your league setup is the case. But let's go with the more common ideology, which is we're 1 week away from a league finals setup. If you're in a limited trades format, this is probably more the narrative of the question I want to ask. If you've only got 2 trades left, or 1 trade left, and it is a do or die fixture to make finals or not, different from being top 4 or not, because that's a different type of thought process. If pulling the trigger on your trades this week means you go into net zero, but give yourself the best chance to finals, or hold those trades, we've seen how valuable they can be in SuperCoach and Dream Team over the last couple of weeks. Where do you land on the hold and see what your team does versus maximize all possible outlets to be able to give yourself the best chance of success? How do you choose to approach a week like that?
Oh, that's super tricky. You've got the combination of when the fixtures lie as well. Like, can you wait until the Saturday afternoon and see how your pods are comparing against their pods and whether you do need to pull the trigger or not? It's not an easy decision to make. I would tend to, like, if you're playing in a league and your league is focused, the focus needs to be not only to win the whole thing, but to win the whole thing, you actually have to make the final. So I would be pulling a trade if you think that you're going to need to make it through, but be pulling the trade such that you can set yourself up for a player that's going to score well through those finals as well. And when you start to put those 2 factors together, there's 2 teams that really come to mind straight away. And the unfortunate thing is, the team that you would want to target is the team that plays on the Friday night. And that's the Dogs.
Yeah.
So you can't wait. You can't wait for the fixture to be able to give yourself a bit more information. The next best team to kind of have a look at for that would be Geelong, who do play on that Saturday night. So that does give you a little bit more time. And then you could argue, if you're really going for a point of difference play and wanting to go someone like a Jack Steele, or, let's say you've got an Desire Wangan Miller or you don't, or Jackson Clare, like these types of players are also the ones you can go for at St Kilda. Those are probably the three teams that I'd be looking for. And I think the A1 is the Dogs players. I think any of Liberatore, Richards, Bontempelli, Dale, English could all be good points of differences. Kennedy as well, Darcy if you're a bit short on cash in your forward line. Any of those players could be the really big point of difference that I'd want to target. But if you wanted to wait a bit longer, then, looking at Geelong, looking at players like Myers, Manor, Baz, even, a Stewart, if he's actually going to be named, it's a riskier one, but it's definitely a chance. There's Jezza. There's enough of options across those three teams, but I think those three teams are the ones that I would be looking to target for this last 5 fixture block, especially with this week in mind to try and make a final.
Yeah. Let's come back to leagues before we look at some captaincy options, some fixtures and some matchups, not to wrap up the pod, but to fill out the final few minutes of our podcast. I want to talk about how we should approach creating some separation over these next couple of weeks, and specifically hunting scoring, either hunting that unique element to help you with that league matchup and or really forced separation in the top, really 150 to 200 in AFL fantasy, top sort of 50 in Dream Team, and maybe the top 300 if I'm stretching in SuperCoach. And I'm talking about someone that's going for overall victory. And to an extent, we could maybe say the overlay of your PB rank could sit in that. How aggressive should a coach be? Understanding everyone's got a different risk profile, I understand. But how aggressive should a coach be at this point in time of the year, knowing anything more than 50 to 70 points a week to chase on the pack in AF is almost impossible to do with the double trades a week. And there is an unknown trade variance in SuperCoach and Dream Team, so we could probably stretch that to maybe 90 to 100 at its peak. How aggressive should a coach be in enforcing separation to create not just a unique player in isolation, but a combination of a few different uniques?
It really depends on what your current rank is and what you think your rank goal is and how likely you are to achieve that with the team that you've got. Like, let's say you're bang on rank 100 at the moment at AFL Fantasy and you're hanging on for dear life for a hat. Your goal was to finish top 100 and you've got a team that's slowly been climbing week after week after week. I don't think that's a situation where I would try and force a point of separation for the sake of pointing separation. But if you've gone the other way and you've gone from, 80th to 85th to 90th to 95th to 100th last 5 weeks or so, you might have a team that just needs that little bit of point of difference in order to give it that oomph, that little kick it needs to get back into that top 100 spot and be able to finish with a hat. I think that that's the way that I would approach it. Think about whether you're rising or you're falling. Think about the reasons why you're rising and falling. Have you had a player get injured? Have you had a player get a really bad tag score, but they're coming into a good run of fixtures? Have you had just a bad captaincy and you missed out on 20 points and that was the difference between staying even or moving up that particular week? And make the decisions from there. And I guess built into this question, but not explicitly asked by you, is like, how do you do that? Like, how do you decide which players are the ones to go not only towards, but also away from? Like, what are you looking at when you're trying to build separation, MJ?
I'm looking at ownership based on what my focus is. So league and or ranks, those become that. Yep. So I'm looking at that. And then I'm looking at fixture versus ownership in those as my initial things, both in who's owned to either separate myself from that I hate the fixture, and the inverse of that, which is who's not owned and I love the fixture of that. So there are certain players. And then the other variable is who are the teams that are preparing for finals and don't give two craps about what's going to happen over the next month. Now, outside of probably Collingwood, I don't think there's a team that's not battling for a position. And you could argue that Fremantle's victory, yep, got it twice on the podcast, go us, is probably feeling stable in terms of top 4, top 8. There's so much flux that's there. But in 2 to 3 weeks' time, Brisbane could be solidified in that top 4. Geelong could be solidified in that top 4. Adelaide could be solidified in that top 4. The Bulldogs could find themselves out of contention. So to me, I look at ownership, the for and against. I look at the fixture, for and against. But then I also look at, man, there are teams that are just going to start trialling stuff. And we're seeing teams like a North Melbourne, West Coast doing that in games that don't matter. They trial and kick stuff. So I'm looking at those little things. And I don't think unique is just, as you've mentioned, players that nobody's owning. It's getting off the guy that everybody's on, but without being stupid about it. So for an illustration, I would not be getting off a Bailey Smith this week unless he's injured, because that North Melbourne matchup this week, let alone another Richmond game to come, screams unbelievable gravy to me. So I wouldn't want to be getting off a player like that that's highly owned to just create separation for sake of it. I'd want to make sure it's an informed, beliefed system, not just he's the most owned, everyone's got, I'm going to jump off and go against the popular guy for the hell of it.
What line would you be trying to build separation? Let's go to AFL Fantasy particularly here, because I think that it gives you a bit more ability with us having 10 more trades available from now until the end of the season,
as opposed to 1, 2, 3 or none.
Exactly. What line are you really trying to build separation in? Because
in
I think
terms of defensive line, midfield, like that sort of line, or scoring line?
Yeah, exactly. Because I think it's a very interesting year this year where there's not a huge consensus on the top players that are owned in top teams. Like if you look at the ownership statistics across SuperCoach, across DT, across AFL Fantasy, there are a couple players that are in that, mid to high 90s range, but there are a lot of players in that 40s, 50s, 60% owned that you could use to get separation just by dropping down from someone who's in that 90% range. So where are you probably heading towards?
I'm probably looking more for the midfield right now. The forwards feel a little bit same, but different to me. I don't feel like outside of a Bulldogs run and a Bailey Smith run, there's anyone I'm screaming I want to have my shares in. Everyone's like, bit of Rankin, bit of Petrarca, bit of Warner, whatever. To me, there also feels a lot of consensus around the defenders I don't want to go against. I don't want to go against Nazaya Wanganeen-Miller. I don't want to go against a Max Holmes. I don't want to go against one of the Lockie GWS boys. Like, these are the guys that their fixture and their role and the need for them to perform is there. Whereas the midfield, wide open gate about who it could be. And so players like a Tim Taranto, just for an illustrative sake, over the last 2 weeks has been perfect because he's got the ceiling capacity, he's got the matchup, he's got the fixture, he's got the market share, and he's so lowly owned that I can attack in that space. And he can get the 120, he can get the 130.
You want to know how lowly owned he is in AFL Fantasy?
Please.
He is not owned by anyone in the top 100 teams in AFL Fantasy. And he's owned by 3 of the top 250. And he's just gone back-to-back 120s. So that would have been the player to go for.
100%.
Let's talk about players that you can get off of in terms of high ownership.
Please.
In the top 100. I'll give you the top 8 most owned premiums currently.
Okay.
Nick Dacos, Jordan Dawson, Andrew Brayshaw, Marcus Bontempelli, Zach Butters, Zach Merritt, Tom Green, and Adam Chera. Now, bearing in mind, Adam Chera is already down to 28%. So there's a lot of diversity on that 8th premium, quote unquote, in your midfield line. But which of those 8 are you looking to get off of? And which of those 8 are you happy to stay on with the pack with?
I'm happy to stay on Dacos. That's not someone I'd like to create some separation on. 100% Bontempelli based on the fixture and how important these 5 games are to the Bulldogs. For me, they're the 2 that I probably wouldn't hear much of a conversation. And then when I throw the layer of this week's matchups on top of it, I couldn't justify getting off of a Brayshaw. I just couldn't do it. With that, Chera for me is the easiest jump off of all of those players that sits through there. I'm happiest to jump off. And then I wouldn't be far away, fixture-wise, jumping off of a Zach Merritt. He's the only man in that midfield. And we, the Royal Merritt owner, got off scot-free last week. Like, that could have been a disaster game. And so to get away in AFL Fantasy lens with a high 90s score, that's a get out of jail free because that had 50 or 60 written all over it, had the tag landed. So that's why for me, I think the midfield's the line. There's a bit less uniformity around it based on ownership in the upper percentages to be able to go. And there are some great matchups through there. You mentioned Jack Steele, like not cheap without any question, not cheap, but is powering through at the moment. Libba, not cheap, not as expensive as he's been, but unique and powering through, has shown us over times. So there's a couple of good ones. Who are some of the players of those 8 that you've mentioned? Is there some names you would either add to or differ from me to be either on or off?
No, I think you've nailed the ones that I was very keen to get away from as well. I think Zach Merritt is probably up there. I think Chera's lost a fair bit of his cash now, so I think that it's harder to justify, but I can still see a world where getting off of him is the right call. And to a lesser extent, I'm not sure if I'd have the guts to be able to do it, but Zach Butters is 71% owned. And their next 3 fixtures is not easy. It's Adelaide, Geelong, Fremantle. It's a very hard one because he is a player that has unrivaled ceiling. Like you talk about those players you just mentioned before, and Brayshaw, Dawson, Dacos, Bontempelli as players that can go in that 150, 160 marker. Butters is also another player that can do that. And
of course,
I don't think Adelaide will tag, but there's a chance that Geelong sends someone like a Mullen or an Atkins to spend a bit of attention alongside him, and that could really restrict him.
Yeah,
but again,
really
the last 2 fixtures against Carlton and Gold Coast make it a bit more friendly, but he's one that I would be, if you didn't have a Merritt and you didn't have a Chera already, and you were on some pods and you think that this is a way to build some more separation, that absolutely going someone like him at a good price as well, it's an easy move to just jump 30k sideways to, as you just talked about, Liberatore or Jack Steele.
So we're looking at these unique options to either get off the popular one, again, not for the heck of just, I need to create separation. There's got to be a narrative that holds. And then the variance of luck does come into it, but it's got to be a narrative that holds water, holds the test of time. And I want to be unique is not a good enough reason. It's, I want to be unique to create separation. And the players I believe I should move off are A, B, and C for subsequent reasons. And I want to jump on D, E, and F because of these subsequent reasons. It needs to have more than just create a pod for pod's sake. That's the worst way to play fantasy footy, and putting so much luck into a space where there's so much good information out there now in the fantasy community. You don't just have to run the gauntlet through there. The other variable that sits in creating some separation, again, Dream Teamers and SuperCoaches now can pick up a little bit more in that space, especially if they've got no or limited trade opportunities for them, is to get adventurous to a degree with the VC and their C options. So that's probably the other unique variable that can create some separation for us. How do we go about it with a week like this one coming up? I feel like if we just base the ownership percentage as the top thought process, it won't be uncommon to see people go, I'm going to roll across formats, a Bontempelli on a Friday night who's got a good history and a good matchup into Nick Dacos on a Sunday. Like that 1-2 punch, and understandably is going to be quite popular. Where do you go against the grain for a grain's sake in this versus going against the grain to be tactical? How do we do this? Because if you did that with Isaac Heaney last week, you looked like a genius, right? So how do we find the Heaney of this week without losing the great options that present itself for us?
So when we're always targeting vice captaincy and captaincy, we're looking at the fixture and we're looking at the teams that allow players to get off the chain, to hit unbridled ceiling in their particular line. And when we looked at last week, yes, there were a couple of standouts, but it wasn't an easy round to find a vice captain or captain because 2 of those teams that we normally would go to were playing each other in West Coast and Richmond. And a lot of players, unless you had a Tim Taranto, you weren't really looking there for a vice captaincy or captaincy option. So people looked at, GWS against Essendon, and if you hit Tom Green in SuperCoach, you're probably happy. If you hit him in AFL Fantasy or Dream Team, you probably weren't. And then Sydney versus North Melbourne was the other big one where people were able to hit on Brody Grundy, and Isaac Heaney primarily as those two. When we come into this week, those 4 fixtures are all spread. They've all got teams that have got fantasy relevant players in them playing against them. And so it presents an opportunity to go against the grain because, as you said, a Bontempelli will be a very popular vice captaincy option, especially in SuperCoach. But you could also go into someone like a Tim English in that game. If you've got Ed Richards in SuperCoach, he's also a vice captaincy option as well. As you mentioned, Collingwood versus Richmond, the only player you're going to be vice captaining in that game, or captaining in that game rather, is a Nick Dacos if you own him. I don't think I'd go to a Josh Dacos. I just don't think he has the ceiling that you'd really want to target in these last 5 weeks. But the 2 other fixtures that exist are Fremantle versus West Coast and North Melbourne versus Geelong.
That's true.
Now, Fremantle versus West Coast is an interesting one because I've talked to a few other people in different chats, and they think that there is a possibility, and I do agree, there is a possibility that Sean Darcy gets arrested this week. I don't think it will happen. I think they will try and keep the continuity with him, but there is a possibility, and if he does, all of a sudden, Luke Jackson might become the number 1 vice captaincy option across formats. Ability to chop out ruck. He's going to be rucking against Flynn. There's ability to go forward, kick goals, act as a midfielder as well. Outside of that, Caleb Sarong in SuperCoach. Like it's the Glendinning Allen medals, the Derby. The man has 4 to his name and he's 24, 25 years old already. Like he's tied with the most number and he just has an absolute fiend of a game. Those, I think Brayshaw's another one you could go to there. And then you roll into that Saturday night fixture with North Melbourne versus Geelong, and you're thinking, gee, Baz Smith had a bit of a down game on the weekend. What if he just wants to bounce it back? What if he wants to actually be able to contend for that brand? Like, what if you've got a Jeremy Cameron who just kicked 5 goals against St Kilda and popped a good score? Like, could you just chuck the VC on him and pray that he gets an 8 or 9 goal game? Do you have a Max Holmes who can get off the chain as well? Are you willing to risk it on someone like even like a Brian Myers who has shown his ability to be able to score quite well as well? These are the types of players that are going to go under the radar a bit because the easy option this week will just be to go, I'm vice captaining Marcus Bontempelli and I'm captaining Nick Dacos and I'm not thinking about it. And understandably, but there's enough other good fixtures that you can actually make as a way to generate separation. And you can always just say, you know what, I'm going to take my separation with my vice captaincy. I'm going to say, I'm going to vice captain Sarong. I'm going to vice captain Bailey Smith. And then if worst comes to worst, I will captain Nick Dacos on the Sunday. That's a way to build separation away from the pack just with one decision.
Yeah, it's some good advice. And then there are other names you haven't even touched, like Max Gawn to end the round. If you really want to just go, I'm going to go Dacos into Gawn, and it's always risky doing a halftime VCC switch with so many great options. But you're right. Even the Brisbane matchup for Gold Coast for some inside mids, if you're a Lockie Neal owner in SuperCoach or a McCluggage owner.
Josh Dunkley owner.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah. Yeah, this could get real interesting this week for some options, for sure. Hey, let's talk our stocks on, stocks off to wrap up this podcast. If you're just catching up on the strategy session, we've been doing it over the last 2 weeks. We do it in the last 6 weeks of the year. It helps you with some quick rapid fire, some separation points of the guys you want to get off, the guys you want to get on, of who we would be stocks on. We can only pick one player from the game, so 2 options, and one player that we're off. So a player we're on, we're player off. We'll go to the Hawks and Carlton. Is this the most fantasy irrelevant game of the round? Dare I say it? In terms of names that we're really looking at?
Probably the most fantasy irrelevant game. Yeah, it has to be. Look, stocks on Sam Doherty in his retirement game. Are they just going to feed him the ball? It's a risky one. Only an AFL fantasy play. You're banking in the trade out the next week, but he's a pig. He knows how to find the ball.
Yep.
Stocks off. I'm not going to go the easy route. I'm not going to go in the easy route and say Adam Chara because I don't think I'm massively stocks off on him. I'm going to say Dylan Moore.
Nice. Good shout.
Great game on the weekend.
Undoubtedly.
In the wet. Knows how to do it in the wet. lots of ground kicks, just not play that I really want to go to in my forward line at this stage of the year. Yes, the price is attractive, but I don't want a piece of it.
Not one little bit, and fair enough too. Bombers and the Dogs. You've already said you're not going to take the easy low-hanging fruit. Are you going for the Bontempelli easy low-hanging fruit here? Or because there's so many options in this game, you're like, I don't need it, I'm going elsewhere?
I think that with this, I want to be a bit more funky and talk about players that, we just talked about before, players who want to trade into and players who want to trade out of. And so the player that I actually really want to trade into this week, and I'm very frustrated that I just can't afford him in SuperCoach, is Matthew Kennedy.
Yeah.
There was talk that 2 weeks ago, that game where he scored a 30 AFL fantasy and a 16 or something in SuperCoach, I think it was an 18, that he was ill. And he just bounced back this week with 104. You combine that with the fact that they've got a pretty nice run home. I'm stocks on Matt Kennedy. And then in a similar vein, Sam Darcy as well, if you really want to have some fun.
Oh, in SuperCoach, if you're a Tim English owner, like there's your unique VC. The best matchup in fantasy footy over the last 5 weeks in SuperCoach is Rucks versus the Bombers. Like, and not just the best by a few, by like plus 10. It is a wild matchup. Like I can almost bank on pig mentality from Dr. Supercoach going, this is your VC number one choice kind of thing. Like it is so good if you're an English owner. There's not as many people on it, but yeah. Who are your stocks off though in this game? Because it's probably not a Bulldogs player.
We talked about it before. It just has to be Zach Merritt, man.
I agree, man.
He is a lone soldier fighting an uphill battle against arguably the most accumulating midfield in the competition. I would hesitate to say the best, but they're definitely in the top 5, but they're definitely the midfield that can accumulate the most amount of ball. And when that's the case, the other team has to lose out. And if there's going to be a player that's going to lose out from what their typical average is, that's Zach Merritt.
Yeah. No, it's a fair shout. Swans and the Giants, our second Friday night game. Yeah, so we're going to be a third of the round through before we get to Saturday. So plenty of early VC options if you want it.
Who made this fixture?
Probably some teams that might be trying to squeeze Gold Coast and Essendon in the front part of a round for several weeks for break purposes. Who are you picking and why for stocks on and stocks off?
It has to be the informed player of the competition. Stocks on has to be Brody Grundy.
Oh, yeah.
GWS, you just talked about how Essendon is the easiest ruck matchup in the competition. GWS is, another tier down, but it's still a bloody good ruck matchup.
Yes. Oh, if you don't own like Grundy, Nazaya, Wanganeen, Miller, there's only a couple of them. The ones that it's just, you don't have it. You just hate rolling into every round of fantasy footy at the moment going, the fixture's good. The fixture's good. The fixture's good. Who are you jumping off though in this game?
Lockie Whitfield.
Oh, I like it. James Jordan. They're going to dance.
James Jordan or Braden Campbell. One of them will go to him. The other, they might do the double defensive tag. They rocked it out. I think it was last year in the back end of the year where they did the double defender tags to stop 2 distributors. There's every chance they do the same again this round and just lock down both Whitfield and Ash.
Yeah.
I think that's where I'd be avoiding this week.
I'd be a little nervous of the Callaghan owner too, that they might do Callaghan gets Jordan, Campbell gets Lockie.
It could be the case.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's
Which
not
one,
Lockie
Ash or Lockie Whitfield?
Oh, I think they get a Whitfield. It's really hard to prioritise Ash over Whitfield. But Suns and the Lions, who are your stocks on, who are your stocks off?
Oh, we just talked about it before. I think Big Pod, Josh Dunkley, stocks on.
Yeah, 100%. It's going to get nasty.
Good fun. Been really good the last few as well, and sneakily under-owned. I think that he's one that could be a player to be on in the run home because they're going to be having some hard matchups, and he's a player that really loves that in and under contest and getting a good cuddle. Yeah,
good shout. And then the stocks off of the Suns and the Lions.
This is a bit of a trickier one.
I'd
say that I'm not really too worried about any of the midfielders for either team. I think that Rowell, Anderson, Dunkley, McCluggage, probably all good enough to score well in this game. And there's not really that much fantasy relevance in these two teams outside of that. So I might be a bit cheeky and actually say Sam Flanders is where he starts off.
I don't mind it.
With Daniel Rioli down for, I think it's 4 to 6 weeks, the easy move for them would be to put Sam Flanders back to halfback. But it's not the week to do it. Next week is the week to get onto Sam Flanders when they have Richmond.
Yeah. I'd throw Zorko into the mix. Like the Suns are sneaky restrictive for halfbacks. So that's probably one I'd be a little apprehensive. But again, he's more unique than I think people are kind of factoring. He's kind of he'd be the one that's got away from a lot of people that they've upgraded around and chosen, I'll get cheaper, I'll get different, I'll get cheaper, I'll get different. And just not as highly owned, certainly compared to last year, but in comparison to what he's scoring, that's for sure. All right, Eagles and the Dockers, stocks on, stocks off. Let's let the Caleb Sarong train. Is the love just pouring in? Let's let it go. Did I mention that you beat the Magpies last week? Did I brought that up on the podcast yet? I feel like I've missed that.
That's the third time already. Did you mention that I traded into Caleb Sarong last week in AFL Fantasy for a bit of fun?
Here comes a victory lap. Yep.
Just a small one. But no, I think it has to be Sarong. But yeah, as I said, I think any of those big three Freo players are just all stocks on.
Well,
West Coast, they're not good,
off?
Unfortunately, and they just concede a truckload of fantasy points. Even Richmond went ballistic against them. So that's where I'd be going to. And in a similar vein, stocks off. Look, he's gotten some pretty good fantasy scores the last few weeks, and he's looked very, very good the last few weeks, especially considering how much flack he was getting on early on in the season. Harley Reid's been a very good player. It's just the fixture's just not there anymore.
Like starting to drive, isn't it? Yeah.
You've missed the gravy. And if you go to DVP on DFS Australia and you sort by inside mid and you sort by who has the hardest run home for inside midfielders, the team that's at the bottom is West Coast now. So it's
tough.
I love that some coaches are trying to get creative, trying to bring him in as a defender as a bit of a way to make some cash, but I just think you've missed it.
It's a tough spot to be. Geelong and North Melbourne, oh my goodness, where is Tristan Cherry when we need him? This could have been the matchup motherload to create some unique VCC options this week. Who are your stocks on and who are your stocks off?
Stocks on, Baz Smith, bounce back game.
Oh, yeah. I don't... Geelong is like Baz. Baz is like Geelong. They don't have 2 bad games in a row. They just don't. Yeah. Is it too early to say stocks off McKercher? I feel like much like almost the inverse of Reid. Reid's stocks have been rising, whereas McKercher's have been fading over the last 2 or 3 weeks. Is he too clean and simple a stock off? Or are there others that you'd be looking at?
Despite the tag, he still scored reasonably well. Like, he got a lot of attention in that game, and they're still able to get him a lot of the ball. And it's because of that, I think the stocks off actually still has to be Caleb Daniel.
Yeah.
Because he's the one that's actually losing out. Like, if he's still reasonably well owned across the formats, I think in AFL Fantasy, he's still at, the 50% marker. It's probably him. Like, it's just... And where do the tags go? Like, or do they even tag full stop? Like, they didn't choose to tag against St Kilda.
Yeah.
And Nazaya went off the absolute chain. If they choose not to tag and you've traded out of, McKercher and he gets off the chain, like, that's a 130.
Gosh. Oh, yeah.
That you might have just traded your way out of. And I would hesitate to trade out of McKercher for that, but I don't see a world where Caleb Daniel can go 130 at the moment.
Yeah, it's a fair shout, that's for sure. Our other Saturday night game, it is rivalry round with a lot of crosstown matches if you haven't picked it up. Crows and Port, who are your stocks on and who are your stocks off?
My stocks are on, and this is a cop-out, but it's the 2 captains.
Okay.
It's Rosie and Dawson are my stocks on. No matter where these 2 teams are on the ladder, this game always produces, and it's always led by the captains of their respective teams. And I just have a sneaky feeling they both could have massive games. Rosie will be fighting his way to come back into that team. The media around it, he sounds like he wants to play, and I think he will be doing absolutely everything he can to play. So I think I'd be going there.
Stocks off.
Again, another really tricky one, because I think all of the players that are fantasy relevant from these teams are so for a reason, because they've all got ceilings. So
Yeah.
there's not really anyone that you're just not loving to own from either of them. If there's anyone that the stock's off on, it's probably Isaac Rankin.
Yeah, that's a good shout.
It's very hard. It's very hard to go against. Again, we've seen it. Like, we've just seen him not be as prevalent in that midfield role, but being able to get forward and kick goals and build his score from that the last probably 3 or 4 weeks. And if Port do start to fade away, and that is a potential, I mean, he could get off the chain, but if it's a close fought game, I think he's probably the one that loses out the most.
That's true. Hey, can I ask you about Connor Rosie before we go any forward again? By Thursday night, we'll have at least not a definitive, but a selection call, and then we'll get to sort of 7:10 Australian Eastern time, and we'll kind of have a bit more of certainty, obviously, at that point. But we've had some Rosie, maybe people have been bitten by the 2024 Rosie, I'm fine, I'm not fine, I'm fine, I'm out. Is he the type of AFL fantasy player you would look at trading? Because, again, we talk about creative trading for a second. If you don't own a Sinclair, for example, who's, again, we talk about a nice St Kilda run, or a Holmes, again, you've got to go up a little bit, or, not as much money made. Is that the type of way you're like, oh, I've still got a Horn Francis, I've still got a Nick Martin, I couldn't fix all my issues from last week. So is that the creative way to get a bit of cash and go a Rosie down to? I'm just using Sinclair as an illustrative point, not as loading the dice by any means. Down, and then get your other premium up, get your Rankin up, get your Horn Francis, who's still injured, up, your Chera up. Is that something you'd look at purely, not just because of the fixture, but because of the injury concern around Connor?
I think we have to be very careful to conflate soft tissue injuries with structural type damage, broken hand, broken fingers, dislocated stuff. He was still in training last week. He's still able to run. He's still able to do all the cardio he needs to do. He's just in a bit of discomfort. I'm personally not as concerned probably as what other coaches are with regards to that. I think that he's someone who will, as was evident last year, try and push through it. But in this particular case, it's pushing through pain rather than just pushing through and potentially doing more damage to, say, a hamstring or to a calf. So if you're wanting to get creative and separate away from the pack, because despite his injury last week, a lot of coaches still owned and held Rosie. But if you think that he's going to be named, but he's not going to perform as well as a result of it, that could be a way to separate away from the pack. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, 100%. McCarthy's the popular coverage for him, so you'll know his score at the very least by the time that game's on. So should he be named and then a laid out, you'll at least have a variance of what variable to know what to move with. Last two will power.
Or if McCarthy pops a
120, yeah.
If McCarthy pops a big score and you just want to say, you know what, I'll just trade him away. I'll put in a donut that I might have from that game or one of the later games. If you've got someone who can actually come in and cover, that could be a way that, someone like a Mentha plays last game, has defender forward.
There he is.
You trade out of a Rosie and you can have a forward shout at someone like,
Baz,
Jezza. Thilthorpe. You could go to a Baz. You could go to a Jezza. You can go to a, yeah, exactly. There's enough options there. That's the way that you can play it as well. Or you can use it to go to a midfielder, play a bit of creative that way.
Yep, it's a good shout. All right. Tigers and Pies are our second last one. Is it just Dacos for days and then next? And I'm talking about the Nick variety?
Yep, Dacos for days.
Yeah.
And then next.
Stocks off. Who are you jumping off in this game?
It's the one game you probably don't want to own Tim Taranto for, as good as he's been.
Yeah, that's a fair shout.
Yeah.
Yep. It's a lot more forward in that game too, for what it was worth. But whether that's causation or correlation, we'll have to wait and see. All right, last one before we wrap up the pod. Saints and the Ds. Who are your stocks on and who are your stocks off?
I mean, it's hard to not be stocks on Desire one getting Miller.
Absolutely.
Again, another pod captain option. Genuinely, like if they just keep hitting the ball like they are, 160 is on the cards again.
It could get filthy. It could get filthy for
it
non-owners. Who are your stocks off?
Rowan Marshall.
Oh, for days. Thank the goodness you said that. Get off. Get off.
Yeah. Get off. Just, it's over.
Yeah.
Just call it now while you can.
Yeah. Bruck sharing and against Gorn. Oh, no.
No, thank you.
Not interested whatsoever. Hey, Mini, always a pleasure talking fantasy footy with you. Just 5 rounds left to go. That's only 10 trades left in the AFL fantasy community. It's maybe only a couple, if any, left in Dream Team and SuperCoach. And of course, very much heading towards league finals in drafts and in Classic, as well as then, of course, those that are chasing PBs and rankings. Glory, mate, always a pleasure. We look forward to chatting with you next week.
Good to chat, and looking forward to the Crows being the top of the ladder by the season end. Hey?
Don't you start that. Don't you start. Don't you start. We're doing just fine under the radar. Just let us be there. That's exactly.
Not under the radar anymore.
No,
Not under the radar anymore.
No. Our fellow coaches panelist and host of Finders Keepers podcast, which you haven't checked out, is a great podcast for draft keeper and dynasty league coaches. I'm telling you, Jordox is full lids off. I haven't seen him full lids off for a number of years, so it's quite enjoyable to watch it in the coaches panel group chat. Hey, friend, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode. Make sure if you haven't already, if you're listening to this as an audio podcast, if you haven't subscribed, given us a 5-star rating, and on Apple iTunes podcast listeners, you can make sure you give it a review as well. We'd so greatly appreciate it. It's one of the small things you can do that makes a huge positive impact for us. You can get in touch with us across social media. All the links in the description of this episode. We are on X, we are on TikTok, we are on Instagram, we're on Facebook. You can check us out there. Also in the link and the description is all the details to get your hands on some coaches panel merch and become a Patreon. It's where you get exclusive content year round and access and opportunities to a bunch of different additional content rewards. And of course, you can check out every single one of our episodes on YouTube. And while you're there, you can also check out the Trade Target episodes that land for both AFL Fantasy and SuperCoach every single week. Subscribe to the channel. Make sure you comment below and let us know on this episode what the strategy play you are looking at this week, whether it's trade, VC and Cs, how you want to match up against opponents, or the ranking challenge you're in. We'd love to find out more in the comments section below. 5 weeks to go, friend. We wish you well, and we can't wait to be cheering you on and supporting you in these final 5 weeks of the year. Good luck, and until we chat to you then, we wish you happy trading if you've got them, and we hope you nail your VC and C this week.